Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And as promised, this is the recap for my third week of Horror Mayhem, which was all focused upon cosmic horror. First off, didn't want to read Lovecraft. I read a little bit of Lovecraft a few months ago, and I can't. I don't think I can ever have any reading relationship with that man. I just can't get into his work because I find no matter how good the prose is, the racism is so distracting and so disgusting, it just doesn't make any of it readable for me. I just don't get anything from Lovecraft as a creator. I know that's kind of like a lot of people do. That's just me. I only am going to live so long, and there are better people who just stole his ideas and did other things with them. So I spent most of my time with that. So that did leave me with a bit of a problem in that now I have to do cosmic horror because the cosmic horror is very much based upon the work of H.P. Lovecraft. And I tried, and I failed. As we kind of go in and talk about some of the books in this collection that I've read, there will be some arguments about whether or not any of this was cosmic horror, to be perfectly honest. I might not have achieved anything with this week. I'll give you some reasonings why I think certain books that I read do fit into cosmic horror, but let's start this off. The first book I'm going to talk about is the one that has direct ties to the Cthulhu mythos, and that's Dead Man's Road. This is by Joe R. Lansdale. This is a collection of 5 stories, 1 novella, and 4 short stories. And it all is revolving around this like alcoholic preacher going around killing various undead creatures and various folklore creatures. And the thing is, they're all tied into the Cthulhu mythos in some form. So there's like zombies, but the reason why there's zombies is because someone read from the Necronomicon. Oh, there's like werewolves, but it's not like traditional werewolves. It's because like an ancient demon came and like gave werewolves power or something like that. And a lot of the creatures in this are like taking ideas from various folklore and then adding a Lovecraft twist so they can get onto it. And like the alcoholic preacher at the center of the story, it's like he does not like God, which is very interesting because it's not like a very pro-Christianity book. And this book is positing that like only the Old Testament God exists, and he's like super big dick. He's like an asshole, and like the preacher hates him. So it's like him being like, oh, he's just a man participating in the war of the gods. So the idea is like there's old gods and there's like the quote unquote Christian God, and like they're all at war kind of thing, and he's just one. He's just kind of stuck in the middle. And feels like he's been chosen for one thing or the other. I liked the short stories a lot better than the novella, Dead in the West, which is where it kind of all started with, because Dead in the West gets weird. There is a prolonged element of incest in this book, in that we find out our preacher, he had sex with his sister when they were young, and he is like obsessed with that sin. And then you're like, okay, I guess it's just kind of trying to talk about that, I guess. I don't know why. Because, when you do like an Old West tale, you have to have a reason for the gunslinger to have like a dark past. There's got to be something. Because normally it's like, oh, I murdered a man, or oh, a bunch of cats ate my dad while he was ranching on the farm, and now I'm angry. But this one chose incest, which was very weird. And then there's a central romance in this with the preacher has like a love interest, and it's based off that the woman reminds him of his sister. And I'm like, why is this happening? Like, I don't know why this particular element of the story was needed. And all the further short stories don't mention any of that. They don't even address it at all. So I do not know why in the first story it was such a big component. And I look at the reviews on like Goodreads. Nobody else is talking about this. I think everyone else is just fine with it. Just rolls off the tongue. And I'm like, all right, I guess you guys are weirdos, but okay. And it was just like, it was surprising and distracting, and I don't think was needed. I mean, obviously, I don't think anything is off bounds for discussing in fiction, but this is supposed to be like a pulpy tale that doesn't have a lot of depth to it. So that element just kind of is there, but they don't do anything with it, and it doesn't seem like there's anything really to say with that. And I'm like, why? I don't know why that was there. The other issue with that first novella is that it wants to talk about some of the racism and like horrors of the Old West, and it does do that thing where like a lot of, I would say, left-leaning white writers have a tendency, especially in this era, where they're kind of trying to address the fact that they grew up watching old westerns that were very racist, and they're trying to like get into the modern era and be like, oh, I want to write about things that affected me in my youth. Like, I want to write a western tale, but I also want to write that it was not a great place and that there's a lot of racism and like horrible things happen there. And it does that thing where, unfortunately, people of color in this story who are the ones taking their revenge, basically. Like, the main curse of the town is because they did a horrible hate crime, and they are just victims. They're not characters. I think that is something that is a pit that a lot of white writers tend to fall into, where they want to address the horrors of the past, but they don't make a character. They just make a people who are basically a symbol. And I don't know how anyone who's like a person of color would read that and have any enjoyment of it, because it's just like, oh, you didn't make a character. They're just a victim. And I just thought that was a little bit... I didn't love that too much. But once the zombie stuff gets in, the zombie stuff is good. And then all of the other elements, all the other further stories, like all the short stories, are great. I actually really do like the short stories. It's Dead in the West that I have the most difficulties with as far as just content-wise. Me and Jorah Lansdale aren't the closest, I would say. I did not like the drive-in books. I read drive-ins part 1 and 2. I didn't think they were terrible, but like I just didn't enjoy the experience of reading them at all. And I just thought, like, oh my goodness, how depressing are these stories, and why do we have the least likable protagonist of maybe all of cinema? And I was just not into that at all. So I don't know. I like his short stories, but sometimes when he gets a novella, and I guess when he gets longer tales, I don't always love it. But I did also read another Jorah Lansdale tale, which was Batman captured by the Engines. And this is a book where it's a Jorah Lansdale Batman story, and I thought this was going to be more more cosmic horror. This one was not very cosmic horror. It was more about, again, Native American mysticism. I don't know why. I seemingly read 2 stories where Jorah Lansdale is kind of falling into that trap. This one involves a fictional tribe, and basically the opening, like, Jorah Lansdale's kind of talking about, like, oh, I made up this tribe to fit in with the Batman universe, like, and not, and it's another story that I think is a bit mixed in terms of how it's going to handle some of its race relation stuff. But again, if you're reading cosmic horror, let me tell you, a well-meaning but flawed white progressive is not the worst you'll get with cosmic horror. There's another guy, and he's very bad. So it's not perfect, but I did love the way that Jorah Lansdale wrote Batman in this. And because it's Jorah Lansdale, it deals with the horrors of the world and the horrors of Gotham, but it doesn't like sugarcoat it. So like it deals with something like people who are on like drug abuse, and it's not like a fake made up drug like they did in that newest movie where people are doing eye drops, and you're supposed to be like, oh, this is a grim, gritty Batman, but everyone's doing a drug called eye drops, right? Like there's just like a level of realism to Gotham that gets put into here. And I really, really like the way that Jorah Lansdale writes Batman. I thought it was great. It is simultaneously like brooding, but also like hopeful at the same time, where he is trying to actually be a good person and feels bad about like doing some of the stuff he has to do. And there are like moments where he just goes out of his way to like help a homeless person on the street and like gives them food, gives them like money to get a bus ticket back to their hometown, gives them all the diapers because they have a child, and like there is just a level of care that you don't see in a lot of contemporary Batman tales, which I always feel like is missing, because Batman as a character is, I love Batman as a character because he has a lot of heart to him. And I like the idea of him doing good things for people, and like modern interpretations of Batman is like, I just punch things and I cry and I'm sad and I punch things. Whereas this one wants to talk about how, yes, he broods a lot, but then there is some elements of like him being an actual hero. There's not a lot of Batman in this. It's kind of like a subtle a story about other people. And Batman is in it a little bit. I would say probably about, I would say there's at least 40% Batman in this story. And I really like the Batman that we get in this. It feels like a good Batman, and I really like that. I saw some criticism online saying that this isn't Batman, this is not my Batman. And which is always very funny, because Batman as a character is the most flexible character of all time. He's been adapted countless times, and there is not really a consistency of character with Batman. It is kind of a general idea that everyone goes into, and they can put their own spins on it. And I don't think that you could ever really call something like this as having not Batman, because this is Batman. It's just Joel Lansdale's a good writer, and you're mostly used to bad writers writing Batman. Anyways, the cosmic horror elements of this is it's a werecar. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a werecar story, and it's got some gruesome kills in this. Like, there are some gruesome kills in this, and a lot of the cosmic horror elements come from like dreams. There's a lot of like really fascinating dark dreams having to do with like cars, and what the and like a lot of like horrific visuals of. There's one point where, the classic, it's a Batman tale, so of course we have to have a flashback to when his parents died. But I don't think we've ever had a flashback where his parents died, but everyone's cars. And like, you think that's different? That's ridiculous, because yeah, it is ridiculous at first, but then it gets dark and twisted, and like there are like people getting shot, and like the bullets are like these wheels that are like human wheels that are like connected in this like horrific like Cronenbergian existential dread. And that's where the cosmic horror stuff comes into this, is mostly through the dreams that various characters have, not so much the normal things that happen in this book. And I thought that this would be another Old God's Tale. It wasn't really, but I did actually end up liking this story quite a bit, just because it has a really good Batman. I ended this story hopeful. This is my favorite Joel Lansdale book. That's weird to say, right? But so far it is. I don't know. While I'm on this topics of just talking about the Western aspects, like Old West mixed with like Cthulhu mythos with the first story, and then a little bit of the Batman story also has a little bit of Cthulhu stuff in the existential, like Cronenbergian nature of it. There are two podcasts that I want to recommend if you're at all into that mixture of the subgenre. There is a podcast called Ain't Slayed Nobody, which is like a Call of Cthulhu podcast set in the Old West. And I'm actually a patron of them, and like they have like really cool rewards, and these are like two postcards I got sent. This art is actually by John Summerow, and I love this art. This art sits on my fridge, but it's like it's kind of like it's like a role playing podcast, but so like a bunch of people playing D&D, but it has really high production value, really interesting characters, really interesting setting, and it does a lot with just trying to tackle the Old West and the Cthulhu mythos inserted into it in a really, really great way. So if you're at all interested in that, I would definitely recommend Ain't Slayed Nobody. But there's also another podcast, Old Gods in Appalachia, which is a direct cosmic horror podcast based in like similar settings. And it is basically like, it takes all the Cthulhu mythos and like does it in a really interesting way where basically like all of the like evil in the world, all of the like the otherworldly horrors that happen are like capitalism. So it turns the Cthulhu mythos into this very interesting discussion about capitalism in like 1920s, 1930s America, and all set in the Appalachian Mountains. That is just gorgeous and is just wonderful. So those are two podcasts to listen to if you're at all into that mixture and subgenre. Next is another story I read that I don't think this didn't end up being cosmic horror, which is the novelization for the movie Blue Sunshine by Ken Johnson, the same one who did the Zoltan Hound of Dracula novelization that I talked about a few months ago. So this is a movie about like people going crazy after taking bad LSD, and why I thought this might be cosmic horror is because I thought it was like, oh, they're gonna take the drug and they're gonna like enter a new plane of existence and go mad because of it, right? And I thought that was kind of be the main reveal, like that they are trying to like ascend to another level, another plane of being using like LSD to kind of escape the confines of our world. And I thought there would be anything to do with the explanation, but you don't get any explanation. The explanation is they had some LSD and it was bad, and it made all their hair fall out, their eyes go black, and then they murder people. There's like no explanation as to like what created the blue sunshine that made this happen. So the cosmic elements, not really there. There's not much cosmic elements in there. There's not much explanation at all. But I did think, again, I think Ken Johnson is a pretty good writer, writer of novelizations for sure, because I've never seen this movie, funnily enough, but I really enjoyed the prose of this novelization. I thought this was a really fun and really well-written novelization. There were just a few elements where I was kind of hoping for a little bit more. Would have loved any explanation as to where the fuck Blue Sunshine came from, why it's turning people mad, any of that stuff. Well, we don't really get that. But this is another book I read, hoping it was cosmic horror. Yeah, it wasn't cosmic horror. But it was a good book, so I had fun reading it. And the idea of your friends just suddenly losing all their hair, their pupils have just all, like, dilated so that their eyes are, like, fully black and just murdering your friends. I mean, that's pretty scary to think about, so, yeah. I finished a short story collection this week as well, which is Aliens vs. Predator, Ultimate Prey. This is an anthology of various stories featuring Alien and Predator. Who would have thought? This has some really, really good short stories in it. I only had about 3 short stories left when I got into this. So I wasn't reading any of the stuff that does get into more like horrifically horror, because there is a story called Homestead by Delilah S. Dawson, which is one of the first 3 stories in this collection that I would say is cosmic horror, because it really does deal with the fact of like, it's just like this lady living on a farm in the 1920s. Her husband is gone. She's like completely alone caring for this farm, and she's like about to give birth. And then like the aliens come down, but like it's written in such like a horrific way where all of these creatures like come in the night and what they do to the environment and how they corrupt like the horses, and there's like horse aliens and like a lot, again, the more body horror elements of cosmic horror, seeing things that you just don't understand and can't really comprehend fully, was in this collection. But that's Homestead. The ones that I read were really good. Some of the best stories in the collection, the last 3, but they were not as cosmic horror. It was more like, oh, horror happening in space. If you're at all interested in either of these monsters, this is a good way to kind of see if you'd be into any of the expanded universe at all, because it's just a bunch of short stories, so it doesn't take too long. I found all these short stories really easily readable. The pacing is good. They're not all the best stories ever, right? Because I mean, it's a short story collection, so some are better than others. But as a whole, I was very happy with this. And the last book I'm going to talk about is a non-fiction book. Yeah, that's right. I try to do non-fiction to find my fully cosmic horror. And you know why? Well, it's when I say non-fiction, it's like ghost stories, people encountering like their own paranormal experiences. So that will either be fiction to you, or if you believe in some of these like more out there theories, then it would be non-fiction for you. No judgment either way. I personally more of a skeptic for these stories than anything else, but I wanted to grab this book in particular to read for this month is because it all focuses on one small town and is all about the collective idea of all of the paranormal is connected. So the grand unifying paranormal theory. So this book is called A Strange Little Place, The Hauntings and Unexplained Events of One Small Town. This is all about Revelstoke, British Columbia, which is, I'm in Canada, so British Columbia is just right, is 2 provinces over. And I thought this was very fun to read in that regard, just to get ghost stories from a very specific place. But it was also great in that it deals with a lot of cosmic horror in the real world, because it's all about like talking about like, why is this one small town a magnet for the paranormal? What makes all of these stories happen in this one place? And there's all kinds of theories for it. And the theory that's like the cosmic horror theory is the idea that they're like ultra-terrestrials. And if you don't know what ultra-terrestrials are, they're basically aliens, but the aliens are from a different dimension. They're not, like, it's not from another planet, they're from a different dimension. And the grand unified paranormal theory is basically that they're like thin spots in reality where like other dimensions kind of cross over, and that's how you get ghosts, and that's how you get Bigfoot, and that's how you get aliens with UFOs, and all of this is because it's like a different dimension colliding with our dimension and just making a whole bunch of weirdness happen. Which is a very out there theory. I don't really understand how they came to this theory and just thought to talk about it, but it's one of my favorite theories to read about because it's unprovable. There's no way you can prove any of this. It's all just conjecture, but it is the most fun version of the conjecture that you could have with the paranormal. For me, is reading all about this idea that it's from a different dimension, and I just think that's all very, very fun. This is a very quick read. It's all really, really well told little segments. It's one of those things where you could probably read this by a campfire and read it to friends. There's plenty of really good tales of the paranormal. Honestly, if you've read one of these books, you've kind of read them all, right? Because I think one of the things about hearing ghost stories is that they do kind of have like the same types of events happening over and over again. I just love to read and hear those events. Like there was a ghost, but he wasn't mean. It was the ghost of my father. He was looking after my children. And like that happens in like a bajillion ghost stories, but it's always kind of fun. There's also good positive ghost stories where there's ghosts who are just nice to people and like make people have better lives, which I thought was fun. And this is also good as like a history of a small town that I've never heard of. I've never heard of Revelstoke. And I just thought this was really cool. And it ended up probably, of all the books I read, it's probably the one that most soundly falls into cosmic horror. So who would have thunk a non-fiction book went into cosmic horror? This week is all about folk horror, so that'll be fun. I only have 3 books I'm trying to read this week, just because I just want to not try to like overblow myself and do too much. And they're all very, very, very folk horror-y. So I will see how this week goes. I hope you guys are having a good Horror Mayhem. What did you guys read for Cosmic Horror Week? Let me know. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye.